The Mindfulness Meditation by Venerable Rung Ruang Papas Saro, Dr. Rung Ruang Lim Chupatipa. The Buddha introduced a new kind of meditation by incorporating mindfulness into the meditation, so-called mindfulness meditation or Buddhist meditation, in order to study the mind and its functions by performing an insight observation to gain wisdom and then applying the wisdom for the destruction of defilements. Practically, the mindfulness meditation starts with establishing mindfulness to perform Yoniso Manasikara, to abandon unwholesome thoughts, including all kinds of 5 lower fetters, to become a master of the courses of thought, and then the mind will dwell in the right concentration as follows.
When the sun rises at dawn, the golden light of the sun will shine as a sign of the beginning of the day. So does the Yoniso Manasikara, mindfulness with careful attention. Yoniso Manasikara is a sign leading to the success of Buddhist practice like the dawn in the morning. Anyone who wants to be successful in Buddhist practice then has to perform the Yoniso Manasikara. Anyone who wants to reach the 7 factors for enlightenment has to perform the Yoniso Manasikara. And what monks is right concentration? Here, monks, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a monk enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with rapture and happiness born of seclusion. With the subsiding of thought and examination, he enters and dwells in the second jhana, which has internal confidence and unification of mind, is without thought and examination, and has rapture and happiness born of concentration. With the fading away as well of rapture, he dwells equanimous, and mindful and clearly comprehending, he experiences happiness with the body. He enters and dwells in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare, he is equanimous, mindful, one who dwells happily, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous passing away of joy and dejection. He enters and dwells in the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant and includes the purification of mindfulness by equanimity. This is called right concentration.
The Buddha outlined a series of wisdom developments starting with confidence, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom development step by step as follows.
Because of having the faculty and confidence, thus it is the basis for the empowerment of effort. Because of having the faculty and effort, it is thus the basis for the empowerment of mindfulness. Because of having the faculty of mindfulness, it is thus the basis for the empowerment of concentration, the right concentration. And because of having the faculty of concentration, it is thus the basis for the development of wisdom. This is the reason why the faith, the great effort, the mindfulness, the concentration, and the wisdom, all of them, are dependently and progressively becoming the faculty and the empowerment of wisdom for mind liberalization in Buddhist practice.
Clearly, the mindfulness meditation starts with establishing mindfulness to eliminate unwholesome thoughts. Then the mind is internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated, respectively. And after abandoning all the unwholesome thoughts of the 5 lower fetters and then dwelling on the right concentration, we have to eliminate the initial thought so that there will be no further thinking development as follows.
Before the enlightenment, the Buddha performed the mindfulness meditation and then continued with the right concentration in most of the early day, especially when encountering the initial thoughts in the first stage of absorption, and he advised on how to handle an arising initial unwholesome thought with proper liberated thinking. I, the Buddha, experienced various kinds of initial thoughts, so I analyzed these initial thoughts into 2 types, the unwholesome one and the wholesome one. The unwholesome ones are such as those of the 5 lower fetters, the initial thoughts of desire for sensual pleasure, those initial thoughts of ill will, and those initial thoughts of taking advantage of others in the first jhana. The wholesome ones are such as those initial thoughts of being free from desire for sensual pleasure with resistance to pleasure response, those initial thoughts of being free from ill will with forgiveness, and those initial thoughts of not taking advantage of others with kindness. The unwholesome will lead to the unbeneficial, and it is harmful. It does not belong to the fundamentals of the spiritual life, while the wholesome will lead to the beneficial, and it belongs to the fundamentals of the spiritual life. And by establishing mindfulness to abandon the arising unwholesome initial thought, then realizing that if letting the unwholesome initial thought continue, it will develop to be a harmful and unbeneficial thought to life. Then it is necessary to have mindfulness to bring in a proper wholesome initial thought, dharma, as a liberated thinking to suppress the arising unwholesome initial thought, so that the mind will become wholesome. The Buddha spends a whole day and night to cleanse all the initial thoughts, and by then the mind is completely free from any disturbing thoughts, and the mind will proceed to the next step of the jhana.
On the day of Buddha's enlightenment, the Buddha made a breakthrough discovery of the way to make use of mindfulness to abandon arising unwholesome thoughts, and then cleansed all 5 lower fetters before dwelling in the first jhana of the right concentration, which will lead to the path and way to enlightenment. The mind will become secluded, which is the state of being peaceful from any disturbing hindrances, and then the mind will dwell in the inner mind for performing insight observation to study the mind and its functions by exploring into the mind to see the Dharma of the process of dependent origination. The mindfulness meditation aligns with the Buddhist study strategy by establishing mindfulness to study the mind and its functions to gain wisdom as follows.
To be pleased with hearing the true Dharma, the truths of nature. To study the Buddha's teachings with careful attention to understand the true Dharma. To establish mindfulness with careful attention, Yoniso Manasikara. To perform the Buddhist practice in accordance with the Buddha's teachings to contemplate on the Dharma. To investigate the true Dharma. To establish mindfulness in accompaniment with Dharma for the destruction of all kinds of defilements. By performing the Buddhist practice such as the mindfulness meditation with effort so that the mindfulness becomes purified with no bias to any arising mental phenomenon, then performing insight observation on Dharma, and then seeing the truths of life within nature as what nature really is. When establishing mindfulness with careful attention, Yoniso Manasikara, and the mind will become glad, raptured, relaxed, and concentrated, then applying purified mindfulness in performing an insight observation to see the Dharma, and then attaining wisdom for the destruction of all the taints. As a result, the mind will become purified, and then the mind becomes disenchanted and dispassionate to the world, and consequently the mind is liberated from all suffering in life. This is the way to gain wisdom of knowing what is right and what is wrong and what we should do or what we should not do clearly. This is called Buddhist study.
In this circumstance, both mindfulness and concentration are needed to work closely together in order to function as a high-quality consciousness to study on the nature of the mind. The mindfulness will make the mind aware of what is happening in the world through acknowledging incoming stimuli from the world, while the concentration will try to hold a particular object of consciousness as long as possible. In this analogy, living in a world with tremendous changing environments, life is in danger and easily becomes unwholesome. Therefore, having only concentration meditation like mantra meditation is not sufficient to maneuver the mind into the right pathway of mind processing. In fact, what we need is the continuity of mindfulness to cope with any danger from the world that may contaminate the mind to become unwholesome. In addition, if any unwholesomeness occurs during mind processing, then instantly establish mindfulness to bring in a proper Dharma to abandon that unwholesomeness along the courses of thought. In Buddhism, because of the drawback of focusing only on the concentration in mantra meditation, the Buddha had to develop a new kind of meditation by incorporating mindfulness into the early stage of meditation and then making use of mindfulness to abandon any arising unwholesomeness to make the mind internally steady, composed, united, and concentrated so that the mind will proceed to the right concentration. The concept of enhancing the continuity of mindfulness applications by turning the mindfulness to be with concentration is the foundation of the Buddhist practice in the mindfulness meditation or Buddhist meditation, which sets apart the Buddhist meditation from the traditional mantra meditation before the Buddha's time.